Now let's go over leetcode question number 1816, truncate sentence. The question says, a sentence is a list of words that are separated by a single space with no leading or trailing spaces. So it's just defining what a sentence is. So first condition is it's a single space with no trailing spaces. Each of the words consists of only uppercase and lowercase English letters, and there aren't any punctuations. So for example, hello world, hello, and hello world are all sentences. So you can't have lowercase and uppercase. You are given sentence S and an integer K. So we're going to be given a string and a number. You want to truncate, so you want to cut our sentence such that it only contains only the first K words and return the truncated sentence after. Now let's look at our example. And if we were to look at our example, we have a input sentence and we have our input number. Now we want to truncate this so that it only has 4 words. And if you were to look at our sentence, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So we want to cut this sentence so that we keep up to here. So the output would be hello, how are you? And let's look at other examples. So second one, we truncate up to 4. So it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4. So up to here. And finally, it's going to be 5. And this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we want the whole thing. Now, in order to solve this problem, I think the most intuitive one is to first convert string into array with each word. So we want to somehow create a array and have all the words in here. So the first one would be hello, second one would be how, and so on and so forth. And after we get this array, we want to cut our array so that we have our first 4 elements and return only hello, how are you? But still, this would be just an array with strings, right? So now we have to convert this into a regular string. And remember that the problem says we can't have a trailing space after a word. So we only have 1 space here, 1 here, 1 here, and no spaces after the last word, which is you. So think about how you can implement this solution and try it on your own. After that, if you're stuck, come back to the solution. If you guys find this helpful, make sure you guys like and subscribe. Thanks. Now let's implement our first solution, and our first solution is going to have a time and space complexity of O of n. And for this one, that we briefly talked about how we are going to implement this. The first thing we want to do is convert our given input string into an array with each an individual word. So how can we do that? Well, first let's make a variable to store that array. And I'm just gonna call it array, and this will be an array with all the words. So in order for us to split all these words, what we can use is something called a split method. If you were to split our string, we want to split where each space is. So we want the hello word, how are you contestant. So we want that all separated. So what we do is we pass in a string with a blank space. So what this is going to do is it's going to cut all the words where spaces are and return that in an array. So let's console log and see that. And here you can see our each individual word without any space in an array. So given that, we want to work from this array. Okay. Now I want to create another variable. So we'll store our output here or our result. And let's return our output over here. Okay, that looks good. And now is the real deal. I want to be able to iterate through my array, and I want to iterate until my current index is less than my k. And as I iterate through my array, I want to put or add each individual word to my output. So let's do that using a for loop. We're going to start at index 0. We increment by 1 each time, and we do that until I is less than k, and increment by 1. And let's add those words. So that would be output dot push, and it's going to be array at index I. If you look at our solution, we have all the words, how are you, and that's 4, and this is also 4. What is the solution? And the last one is all 5 words in here. But now what we have to do is we have to convert this array into a string. And another important key thing to note is that there has to be a space between all these words, except for the last one, because we don't want any trailing spaces. Well, to do that, we are going to use a method called join. And just like split, we will pass in a space, and you can see that we got our result. So think of split and join opposite of each other. Split was used to split the string based on whatever this is, in our case, which is an empty space. Join is used to join all the words in an array, and we are putting this between all the words, which in our case, again, is an empty space. Now, that's it for our solution. Now, let's try to implement another solution. And the logic of this solution is, to be honest, exactly same as our first solution. But I think it's good to practice implementing different kinds of solution. It makes you think. For this one, what we're going to do is, instead of having our output as an array, and remember that we use join to combine it into a string, right? For this one, we are going to have output that's a string. So first thing will be exactly the same. So we're going to have an array with split it into an array, and we have to give a space, and let's just return our array to see what we get. And we got same thing as before, everything split, all the words split into individual elements. Now let's create a output variable, and this is going to be an empty string. Before we used a array, right, and then join here, but this time we are going to use an empty string just for fun. And let's return that here now. Same as before, we need our for loop. We start at index I is equal to 0 and I is going to be less than k. We increment by 1 each time. Now what we do is we have to add each and individual character to our output. So that's going to be output plus equals array at index I. And you can see that we have our words. So it has 4 words, and this has 4, and this has 5. But the problem is that we don't have a space between each word. So how can we handle that? So in order for us to handle that, well, what we can do is let's first create an if statement. And as long as I is less than k minus 1, we want to add an empty space to our output variable. So that's going to be output plus equals, and we just empty string. And you can see that we got our result. Now you might ask, why is it as long as I is less than k minus 1? Well, if you were to have a k here, you can't see it right now, but you actually have a trailing space after u, after n, and after I here. So in order for us to prevent that, we want to do k minus 1. And if you try this on LeetCode online website, you can see that if you didn't have this minus 1, you would get a wrong answer because you would have a trailing space. Now, how this works is, well, this just works exactly like our push method. It's just that we are adding each and individual character to our output, and we check. So what this is doing here is we're adding each and individual word into our output, and after we add word to our output, we check, well, is I less than k minus 1? Well, if it is, I want to add a space after that. So for the first one, I add hello, and is I less than k minus 1? Well, it's true, so I want to add a space. Now is my second word, well, I add how, and I check again, is I less than k minus 1? So I add the space and do that for all the elements. And obviously I don't do it over here because that way, if I were to have it, I would have a trailing space and our solution wouldn't work. Now let's go over our last solution where we optimize our solution with a space complexity of O of 1. Before we had O of n, right? So this is better. Now for this one, what we're going to do is we're actually going to iterate to all the characters in our string, and each time we find a blank space, we're going to increment our counter variable. And when our counter variable is equal to k, we're going to slice all the characters up to our current index and just return that later. So let's code that. I think that'll be easier to see. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make a variable named count, and this is going to count the number of spaces. Now let's create a for loop. We're going to start at index 0, I is less than s dot length, and we increment by 1 each time. Now I want to check if my current character is an empty space. So if current character is equal to an empty space, what I want to do is I want to increment my count by 1. And then I want to check if my count is equal to k. What I want to do is I want my string to equal to string.slice from 0 to I. And finally, I'm just going to return my string over here. So you saw that we get our result, right? But how does this actually work? So again, our count variable tracks number of spaces so far, and we are iterating through all the characters in our given string. So before we were iterating through each word, but for this one, we are iterating through each character. Now, if my current character is equal to an empty space, I want to increment my count, and when my count is equal to k, I want to cut my string, so 0 to I, so that's going to be all the way over here, and then overwrite my given string so that I can return that later. Now, so how does this actually work? Well, I think everything except this second if statement is straightforward. So when my count of spaces is equal to my given number, which is k, that means that I was able to iterate through k number of words. When I'm here, my count will be 1. So I was able to iterate through 1 word, 2 here, 3 here, and 4 here. And since our k is 4, we stop our loop and we just slice everything up to here and then override it with our input and just return that over here. So that's it for our last solution. If you guys find this helpful, make sure you guys like and subscribe. Thanks.